Okay, in this next section, we're going to be talking about innovation models. So isn't innovation just sitting in a conference room and brainstorming and sticking sticky notes up on the wall or writing on a whiteboard and collaboratively coming together with all the best ideas? The answer is no. And quite frankly, brainstorming sessions like that are very seldom effective because of the amount of time that's involved. So, because it's always usually done in a very short space and it doesn't give you time to have ideas germinate and really truly think them through. So, we have innovation models to be able to come up with this. And these are different frameworks that we're able to use to be able to take all of our ideas and all of our information and have some way of thinking about what information do we have, what information we don't have, and then how do we get to the next level to truly come up with some kind of a decent innovation that can really help the business. So in strategy, if you've had taken any of my strategy courses at SMU, you'll know that we deal a lot with strategic frameworks, and it's the same thing. What we try and do is we try and take the information that we have and we populate the framework with that, and that gives us a really good idea of what we know and what we don't know and where we perhaps need to go do a lot more research to really truly pull together a sequence of eventually a sequence of action plans that will be able to move the business forward. So innovation models. So is innovation an invention? Well, maybe. An innovation, is a patent or idea or a technology, but sometimes a brilliant invention is there and nobody really cares about it or wants to purchase it in the marketplace. So it just kind of sits there, and there's lots of inventions like that where some scientist or some tinkerer in their workbench, coming up with new ideas, comes up with something that they think is just amazing, and no one else really cares. And so now you can get a patent for those things, and it's a great idea, maybe advanced technology, but unless you can create value with that invention, in other words, value something that somebody's willing to pay for, because value is always in the eyes of the beholder, as they say, or in the eyes of the consumer, then it's really not an innovation. So what we need to be able to do is create value somehow with that invention, and that's what innovation truly is. So how do you get innovation? Well, you take that invention or that great idea or that technology and you find a way to commercialize it and bring it to the market. Who does that typically? Entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are the people who understand the markets and all the things that are going on in the markets. Typically, they understand all the new technologies and all the new ideas that are coming together, and they're able to take those together and then, by the way, go find funding to be able to make all this happen, and then be able to take it to the market and present it. And then that's how you prosper. You cut costs to survive, but if you're going to prosper, if you're truly going to move to the next level, you're going to have to innovate. And that's why innovation is so terribly, terribly important in the business sense. So here's some ideas from a gentleman named Peter Drucker. He was a professor at Claremont, but he's also written a lot of books. And the one that we're talking about specifically here is Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And he gives us a lot of good ideas to kind of start off this section. One is that entrepreneurs are the people who innovate, innovation being the specific instrument of entrepreneurship. And he's got 7 sources here of innovation. But what's important is he's got them compartmentalized into 2 different sections here. One is from within the enterprise or industry, and one is from outside the enterprise or industry. And we're going to go through these in detail here. So from within the enterprise or industry, you got some examples here. You've got the unexpected, unexpected success, unexpected failures, outside events. Unexpected success was R.H. Macy. If you're familiar with Macy's, they have their flagship store there on Fifth Avenue, New York. And, back in the early days, you'd be walking down Fifth Avenue, and Macy's had put all the things that they thought would be the next best sellers in the window. They had great, big, huge windows there on Fifth Avenue. So all the affluent people would be walking by Macy's. They see the latest fashion trends. And that was kind of what drove their sales in many instances. Well, one day somebody said, hey, let's stick an appliance out there and see how that does. No one expected it to do well. But sure enough, it was getting all that, exposure to the public by being in the window at Macy's, and all of a sudden appliances started selling well. So now you have clothing there, you have appliances and all kinds of other things now in the Macy's windows. Steel mini mills. Steel mini mills are important because this is how you kind of undercut the belly of a entire industry sometimes. You're familiar with this big steel manufacturing plants. You used to see them on EPA posters all the time, billowing smoke and polluting rivers and all that sort of thing. That does not happen anymore. They cleaned up. But a lot of that was driven by steel, these mini mills. So the mini mills, excuse me, started off, and they were small, kind of efficient steel plants. And they started off, making like steel wire that you would have. You could go into the hardware store and buy. But the big, huge steel plants were like, it's a small market. We'll just abandon that. So they did, and this mini mills made it, made the small wire. The next thing you know, they increased their capabilities to where they're making rebar, which is that stuff that you see that reinforces concrete when they're making sidewalks and things. Well, the big steel, mills were like, we don't make much money in that. We'll just abandon that too. And next thing you know, the steel mini mills are making little small I-beams. Then they're making a little bit bigger I-beams. And all of a sudden the steel mini mills are having more and more of their markets cut out. Next thing you know, mini mills are making sheet steel and starting to compete in some of the areas in which the big, huge steel mini mills, were very, very competitive, and was their major markets. The problem was these mini mills were super efficient, and they didn't have all the overhead that the great big huge steel mills had. So eventually, once again, they just kind of undercut, took one small chunk at a time from the underbelly of the industry until they were dominating the industry, and they forced all those steel mills. In many cases, the steel mills had to go through Chapter 11 bankruptcy to totally reorganize and come back to be competitive again. But it was just small innovation after small innovation, and that's just no one saw that. Unexpected. Swiss pharmaceutical company, world's leader in veterinary medicines, never developed a single drug. How the heck could they do that? Well, they paid attention to what was going on within their industry, and whenever they saw a new drug coming along that had a lot of potential, they'd either buy the patent or they'd buy the company. And so that way they continued to be the world leader. Incongruity between reality as it actually is and what it's assumed to be. In the 1950s, everybody thought because air transport was so efficient, we just came out of World War II, a lot of airplanes were manufactured. Obviously, a lot of ships were manufactured as well during those days. But everybody said, well, air transport, you could get things so much more quickly. So everything's just going to be transported that way. Well, air transport's expensive. Ocean-going cargo vessels is a very inexpensive way to get things across the ocean, as long as you don't need to get it in a hurry. Now, in today's supply chain, we've compacted the supply chains, and we've gone to more to these just-in-time supply chains. Ocean-going cargo vessels have to undergo a lot more scrutiny. What can you wait to get? Because it takes quite some time to get things across the Pacific Ocean. Let's say it's a 12-hour flight otherwise in air transport. So you have to be a lot more careful in your planning process. But bottom line is, if you look at those charts of how many ships are waiting to unload their cargo in the Port of Los Angeles, it takes quite some time, going into months, while you're just sitting out there in the ocean after you've made the crossing, just to unload at the Port of Los Angeles, especially after COVID. So yeah, everybody thought air transport was going to be the way. No, ocean-going cargo vessels still very popular. In the 1950s, television real expensive. However, it almost become a must-have item because it brought this whole new world right into your living room. All of a sudden, people that you heard on the radio, Jack Benny and all these other, they actually had a TV show. You could see what they look like, and you could see them act, right? The news, nightly news broadcasts with Walter Cronkite and others, where they'd look you right in the eye and tell you what the news, and they'd show you pictures of what was going on. And it brought the whole world right into your living room. So it became a must-have. Expensive, but you had to have it. What is something like that today? Cell phones. That's kind of the social currency for a lot of people. A lot of people are willing to pay up to $1,000 to go out and buy, the newest iPhones, whatever. but it's like I said, it's something that you feel it gives you access to the world. And so it's a must have. And so, people didn't see that coming, but it's here. Innovation based on process need. A statistician at Bell back in 1909 said, at the current rate of adoption by 1925, every woman in the USA is needed to operate a switchboard. Of course, today we'd look at that as sexist, but also uninformed, because automation came along and we were able to look at ways to automate, the telecommunication systems. Another interesting process need was, World War I, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand over in Sarajevo was no one in the United States really knew about that or really cared about that. But that's what sparked World War I. And all of a sudden people are starting to figure out that, oh my gosh, things going on in other parts of the country and over the parts of the world can impact me in my own little world here, in whatever city I live in the United States. Time magazine saw that trend, jumped on it, and became the first news magazine to the entire world. And they're still, now of course they've got fallen on tougher times, but they were the huge at the time. Changes in industry structure that catch everybody unaware. The automobile industry had a lot of accelerated growth after the first cars came out. The first cars that came out were, they were trying to replace horses at the time. And of course, those first cars that were coming out were sharing the roads with horses, and as you drove along, things that horses left on the roadside smattered up into the into the cars. A lot of times that wasn't terribly pleasant. But after their initial introduction, people started to see how that really improved life. And then other people started to look at market segmentation. So Rolls-Royce differentiated itself by, not being common. Ford, they had, of course, the mass-produced car. The Model A, the Model T, you can have any color you want as long as it's black. By the way, why was it black? Because that dries the fastest, and Ford was all about getting these things made the quickest, right? Durant, which is part of General Motors now, they responded to a broader market that they started, all Ford's cars were exactly the same. Durant started offering all kinds of different amenities in the cars and overall steel bodies and other things. And so that started to eat into Ford's production and market. So much so that at one point Ford had to just suck it up and shut down the factory for a year and redo his very, very efficient production line. And of course, Agnelli, took military requirements and made staff cars. So all these niches coming out once the automobile industry started going. The hospital industry, of course, we've seen that change dramatically over time. In the old days, it was the health decision was made between the physician and the patient. Since then, as we've seen, mostly a lot due to World War II, when we saw a couple of things happen. One was, people figured out all of a sudden, people were trying to get the best workers for their companies that were producing for the war effort. And all of a sudden, when the president came down and did a price cap and a salary cap, and all of a sudden you couldn't change those, froze everything. So how did you get the best workers to you? Well, you started offering perks. And one of those great perks was healthcare. So the company would pay for all your healthcare. And then, of course, when people came back from the war, they were used to having their healthcare paid for by the military. So it became something that's more common as we see today, where most people have some sort of a program where insurance or whatever pays for their healthcare needs. But that started a huge change. No longer is the decision between the physician and the patient. Now insurance companies are involved. The companies are getting involved because they're paying the premiums to the insurance companies. We have managed care facilities. We have the government involved now, first with HCFA, and then with, of course, Obamacare. And everything's been turned upside down in the healthcare industry. So a lot of changes there and a lot of opportunity, obviously, for innovation and for other players to come in and take advantage of that. Innovation usually occurs when there's a lot of change going on. And so these are all instances when a lot of change happened, and people are ready to take advantage of that change. So changes outside the enterprise or industry. Demographics. It's interesting. The House of Rothschilds, they failed to recognize the whole transatlantic migration. They said only riffraff would leave Europe. They House of Rothschild, I mean, they financed Napoleon, and they financed Wellington, and they financed all these huge businesses in Europe, but they just didn't see that opportunity in the United States. J.P. Morgan jumped into that and founded a bank in New York, and now J.P. Morgan's one of the largest financial institutions in the world. The baby boom impact on universities. What happened? World War II. Everybody came back World War II feeling pretty good, got married. Next thing you know, a lot of babies born, and that now all of a sudden we have a lot of people, and they also a lot of these people took advantage of the GI Bill to get university educations, and then so they saw they're having babies. They knew the value of university education. Now all of a sudden, a lot of their children are starting to apply for universities, and there were fewer and fewer university slots available at that time. So universities had to expand to be able to meet that need. So that baby boom impact. I'm a baby boomer. I'm a product of that. But we had a huge impact on universities. Before, if you wanted to go to university, no problem, you went. They all of a sudden started to get real competitive because of that. Changes in perception, of course, in the 60s, health of Americans has gotten a lot better. And then all of a sudden, feminism and civil rights have changed a lot of the perceptions of people around the world, and the mood and the meaning of different things. And there's opportunities there. New knowledge, both scientific and non-scientific. Chemotherapy has extended lives, kept people alive. Antibiotics kept people from being less sick, and also saving lives. Automation and robotics. This has changed the way factories are. This is also one of the things where innovation, especially in industry, especially in manufacturing, you have to really take a look at where is automation and robotics going, especially with Industry 4.0, where we're starting to take more advantage of the Internet of Things and getting that full cycle of information back, from the end user back to the factory. And so you have to continually be updating your skills to be able to be competitive. And this is the thing that we need to drive into, especially the workforce. You can't just, be that person who comes into work every day, does the same thing, and goes home. Everybody has to constantly updating their skills and not be afraid to embrace things like automation and robotics sometimes. Of course, computers and the internet, you can find out just about anything in the world these days. At the same time, you can buy and sell just about anything in the world these days. Things like Alibaba and, of course, eBay. During the Christmas time, I know people probably had a lot of stuff shipped over from overseas, or went into eBay or even Amazon and showed up right in your doorstep. And so the world is getting a lot smaller in that regard. So this is Alan Afua. Alan Afua is he was a doctoral student at MIT, and then now he's teaching up at Michigan. Has a great book that I use in the innovation course I teach at SMU. But he's going to bring together several different ways to look at innovation and innovation models. Part of it is based on this. One is you have to look at what competencies and assets that you have. Competencies is what do you do well, and assets is what tools you have to work with, okay? But you've got that whole new world out there constantly changing, and people are competing how? They're competing on low cost, perhaps. Something like Walmart's always competing on low cost. Sometimes you're competing on new attributes or new attributes. So people are always coming out with new, better, and different products, and they differentiate themselves that way. But at the same time, in the lower level, you'll see you've got new technological change, and new market knowledge is constantly changing. And this is where the innovator has to be very careful. You have to always keep up with as much as you can with technological change. And you have to always keep up with what's going on in the marketplace, not only your marketplace, but tangential marketplaces that may be able to start, kind of, sneaking their way into your and start to steal your customers, right? So we have to be very careful about those things. This is the profit chain that Afua came up with. I'm going to So at the base of all this is knowledge, but we've got the nature of innovation itself. We've got, and we're going to be getting into these these definitions. You've got incremental, radical, architectural innovations. You've got how complex is the innovation, how tacit is the innovation, what phase of the life cycle is it in, on both sides here. Then you've got the environment in which you compete. You've got the competitive environment, but also the macro environment. The competitive environment is more your immediate industry. The macro environment can be a lot of times be at the country by country level, because each country has different methods of competition and different tax structures and different skill sets and different wants and needs. So an example that would be, if you make an electronic device and you make it here in the United States, all of a sudden you're dealing with 120 volts, 60 hertz, but you go to Europe and all of a sudden it's 220 volts and 50 hertz. So you have to change a lot of stuff in the macro environment there. So you have to be looking at not only just your industry, but the larger picture, the political, the economic, the social, the technological issues that are going on. And of course, how well are you inside your company? Is your strategy sound? Do you have the proper structure to be able to bring these ideas into fruition? Are there systems in place? Do you have the right people? Okay. And so what competencies do you have? We talked about that earlier. Okay, these are the things that you are good at. And then do you have the right tools? And depending upon how well you do all of this, determines what kind of profitability you have. So here's a bunch of models of information. We're going to go through each one of these. The Schumpeter. Schumpeter is a key person. I bring him up first. So he's got Schumpeter 1 and Schumpeter 2. Notice the huge difference between the two. The first one, he says, entrepreneurs are most likely to innovate. Okay, that's fair enough. But then Schumpeter 2, wait a minute, large firms with some degrees of monopoly power are the ones most likely to innovate. Isn't that that's a big difference between these two? So who's most likely to innovate here? He's on one hand, it's entrepreneurs, on the other hand, it's these big firms. Who is it? And the answer was, over time, Schumpeter figured out a couple of things as he did more and more study into this area. So he was of course, he came up with a lot of different things, but his two theories, Mark 1 and Mark 2, sometimes are referred to. But he said that there's these Unternehmergeist, these wild-spirited entrepreneurs. These are the people who really cause change and really create change in the country. But the problem is they don't always have access to capital and the ability to get things done. So when he moved to the United States, and he was a professor at Harvard then, he said, these big companies actually have the wherewithal to be able to create this change. And therefore, they have the capital, they can invest in research and development. And so either one of those is probably somebody who can create change. Now, the difference is, since then, maybe perhaps if he was alive today, he'd have a Mark III, which was these Unternehmergeist, these wild entrepreneurs. They can get access to capital to themselves through venture capitalists and through other means of getting capital to be able to move your product or market forward. We talk a lot about that in the entrepreneurship course. So Schumpeter, smart guy, came up with a lot of different things. Theory of business cycles. In other words, businesses do in fact go through cycles. They have peak times, they have troughs, and it's if you look at it over time, almost every industry does really well. Then for a while, it does kind of poorly. Then it comes back, and it's these innovation cycles that he's looking at. Creative destruction. Creative destruction is essentially, if you have products that are out there, and they've been around a while, you had better be looking for ways to replace your own products with better products, or somebody is probably going to come along and replace them for you in the marketplace. And so you won't be selling products anymore. So he calls that creative destruction, is that you need to creatively be destroying sometimes your own products and product lines by coming up with something newer, faster, better. So there he was, born in Austria-Hungary, 1883. So this is a long time ago he's coming up with stuff and it's still relevant today. So here's a view of entrepreneurship, new products, new production methods, new markets, new forms of organization. These are all ways to create change, an innovative change within an organization. This is typically done by entrepreneurs. So you've got architectural and component innovation. So what are these things? So think about a car, and you've got the overall car, and it has all kinds of components in it. The components are those things that you can kind of think about when you buy the car that you can swap in and out. Like different tires, anti-lock brakes, different stereo systems, maybe better, faster engine, or maybe even, other areas. So bigger fuel tanks if you're on, anti-lock brakes, all these, how much electrics go into the car. These days, cars are almost all computer driven, right? So those are all the different components, but the overall base is the architecture that holds all that stuff together. That's the communications channels, and that's what makes all these components talk together. So you've got two levels of innovative change here. One is at the component level, come up with better tires, come up with a better engine, come up with better anti-lock brakes, whatever. And then you've got the architectural, which is the overall holding all this stuff together. Okay, so that's architectural component innovation. So by the way, in static models here, we're talking about, I should go back here. The static models here, this is where you're taking a snapshot at the time of where you just say where you are right now. Just take a snapshot, okay? The dynamic means you're taking a moving picture. You're looking at things over time. So you've got snapshots here versus moving pictures, okay? So incremental radical dichotomy. So this is where you're looking at, is the innovation at hand, is it incremental? In other words, does it leave your existing products competitive? That's incremental. If it renders your existing products non-competitive, in other words, nobody wants to buy the existing products anymore, that's a radical innovation. And that could be for your own products, or that could be for your competitive products, because you've come up with something so much better than what's available to the market today. You've created that much more value. So organizational capabilities, can you build on your existing capabilities? That's kind of an incremental, you can, you've got enough, you have your competencies and you have your assets, and you can exploit that, and you can build something a little bit better. But if your existing competencies and your existing assets aren't getting it done for you, that's a radical change, a radical innovation. So all of a sudden, you're going to have to really totally shift into new competencies and new assets. Okay. So, the value added here is you have to see exactly where the innovative change is coming from, and where new entrants may be coming in from out of nowhere to be able to exploit any kind of radical innovations. Because one study that we've learned is that most radical innovations come from outside industry, somebody from outside of your industry, and jump into your industry and start competing, and they just came out of nowhere seemingly sometimes. Whereas most people inside the industry, they're really good at incremental innovation because they understand what they have, they understand their customer, they talk to their customer all the time, hopefully, and they can really drive forward in that vein. But it's the people outside the industry who are the ones who are going to create much more radical change most of the time. So here's Abernathy Clark. They're talking about more static here. So mostly they're unbundling technological and market knowledge. And here they're focusing on market capabilities. And so they're saying sometimes incumbents can do pretty well at radical technological innovations. And one of the examples that Abernathy Clark really studied was General Electric. When they came out with all these new advanced medical devices, especially, we had X-ray machines. And then all of a sudden we went to MRIs, and all of a sudden we went to CAT scan machines. So each time is kind of a radical jump in how we can look inside the human body without actually, cutting a hole in the human body, right? And so the good news is General Electric had great relationships with all the users of who would want to use something that would need that medical capability, right? So they knew the doctors and the hospitals that use the X-ray machines. So even though they didn't necessarily invent all the components of MRIs when they came out, they were able to take it, quickly adopt it, and they already had the relationships with all the different hospitals and all the different physicians. And the same thing when MRIs came out. They were able to, that way incumbents, even though the radical technological change was coming along, they had those relationships, they had that trust, and they were able to take full advantage of that. Henderson Clark, this is why incumbents fail at what appears to be incremental innovations, because they don't understand it. In other words, the architectural innovation is coming along, and yeah, the components are getting better, but all of a sudden the architectural knowledge is destroyed. If you think about the migration, let's say from cars as I drive today, right, needing gasoline, to totally electric cars, kind of looks the same on the outside, but all the architecture's changed. You still use some of the components. You can still use tires and things like that, but the entire architecture, when it shifted from internal combustion engines to electronic engines, all the architecture changed, and therefore sometimes people didn't totally get that. Hybrids was kind of a halfway jump in between. So here's an example. We're, in this case, the Henderson-Clark model, where we're looking at it's the same thing as here. We're looking at like a computer hard drive, for instance. So here we're looking at impact, on what we would call the x-axis, low impact on component knowledge versus high impact on component knowledge. On the y-axis, we're looking at high impact on architectural knowledge versus low impact on architectural knowledge. If it's just an incremental innovation, I mean, so, the guys the computer hard drive is that hard drive that goes into your computer that stores all of your resident knowledge and all your files and everything, right? And so if you just make some marginal physical or material changes and makes all of a sudden increases the magnetic disk capacity a little bit, that's incremental. Doesn't change anything dramatically. You can swap hard drives out to get a newer, better, maybe perhaps even, better hard drive, but it's incremental innovation. If you have a high impact on component knowledge, in other words, you're able to go in and figure out a way to change the software and change the read-write heads in the hard drive. Now all of a sudden you've got a faster hard drive. Okay, so it isn't just capacity now, it actually is faster. So here we're just changing capacity. Here we're making it faster. So now you've got modular innovation. Okay, but if we go to the top here, now we're looking at high impact on architectural knowledge. So architectural innovation here, if you think about what the hard drives looked like years before, they took up back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, took up entire rooms, right, of a hard drive. It took that much space to be able to create a decent hard drive, but it's progressively shrank over time. So that's an architectural innovation, as the hard drives kept from great big huge things to smaller. That's architectural innovation. Radical innovation is when, okay, we're not even dealing with we're dealing with a whole different technology here. Now we've gone from magnetic to optical technology. So a lot of the technologies that we used in the magnetic world, they're not useful anymore. Now it's all optical technology. Okay, so that's a radical innovation. And so you can see, it depends on what quadrant you're deciding to do your innovation here as to what kind of an impact you're going to have. Disruptive technological change. We talked about the disruptive technological changes of the mini mills. So a lot of it is down here. The value added here is sometimes you're listening to your customers too much. You're focusing too much on a customer. They're telling you what they want now, but they don't necessarily know what they want in the future. Okay, so you need to be able to work with them to figure out, new resources, new processes. What's the old technology? How can we migrate to a newer technology? Okay, so a lot of this is, you create a new market by doing what? By introducing some kind of new product or service. But the new product or service usually has to cost less than existing products or services, or add a lot more value than existing products or services. Okay, so disruptive technologies, they require all those same things too: resources, processes, values that are different than what are required in exploiting the older technologies. But by the time the incumbent decides to adopt the new technology, just like the big, huge steel mills did, It's too late. It's too late. They'd already given away too much market share. They'd already had too much capital overhead that they had to deal with. So they had to go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Excuse me. And then, kind of just really kind of start from scratch. So there's your mini mills right there. Disruptive technology, low quality to medium quality to high quality. Then eventually they were up here to competing directly against the big, huge steel mills. Innovation value added chain, extends. They're looking at the whole value added chain of suppliers, customers, and complementary innovators. So Amazon, great example. Okay, so this is why incumbents may fail at incremental innovations, why they may succeed at radical innovation. So Amazon started off selling books online. No one really cared much at the first. All the people who owned bookstores, even bookstore chains, Border, Barnes and Noble, whatever, they all just said, well, yeah, but people like to go in, they like to browse through the book racks, they like to talk to staff, they like to get recommendations, they like to do all those kinds of things. Well, Amazon started to create a lot of that virtually. You can have chats, with the artists, online. They have special sessions set up. You can see what other people think. You can see what experts think. It's all there in the references section. By the way, one thing I had pointed out to me years ago, I never noticed that Amazon has everything from A to Z, and that's a big smile. There was they took a long time to come up with that design. But Amazon eventually they cut out the bookstores. They cut out everybody in between, the warehousing, because they were mailing it directly to you. A lot of it was print on demand. And so of course they had smaller warehouses around, but they were able to really streamline the entire supply chain. And next thing you know, there's not a lot of bookstores around. If you're a bookstore right now and you're doing well, it's because you have a very specific niche. Good example of that is my friend Otto Penzler in New York City owns the Mysterious Bookstore. And if you want a great mystery book, you go there and they've got an amazing staff. People come in there all the time. They really treat their customers well. That's how you survive in that niche. But it's a very strong niche in a pretty big market, New York City. But people go down to Tribeca all the time just to get books at Otto's store. So, but Amazon killed almost all the other independent bookstores, okay, and killed Borders. Barnes and Noble is, they're still kind of struggling a little bit. Tesla. So this brings up the thing of complementary innovators. What's the one thing that Tesla really needs to have and has continued to work on, to the credit of their leadership team, Elon Musk, is complementary innovators. Complementary innovators are those who, even though they're in your realm, but they're not part of your company. So the first complementary innovators, let's say for cars, when cars first came out, the complementary innovators were those people who help cars sell, people who build roads. So you could go all these different places on the road. So the US government, complementary innovator. Ford and General Motors didn't do that. The US government did that as a complementary innovator, and it helped cars sell. How did you get from one place to the other? Well, all of a sudden gas stations started popping up. So you had all these different, Standard Oil, you started setting up gas stations all over the place. And now you could travel, theoretically cross country, just filling up every so often, because gas stations weren't around before that. And so that was a complementary innovator that really helped them. So what does Tesla need? Well, the roads are already there, but the complementary innovator that Tesla's really looking for these days is charging stations. And so they're going to, right now, the way it works is, if Tesla's a great car if you just use it to travel around Dallas or whoever, around your city. If you want to drive cross country, it becomes a lot more of a challenge, because the length of time it takes to recharge the battery, which they're working on, it's getting better and better and better, and how often you can find charging stations, and they're building more and more and more of those. So Tesla's building their own, other people are building to that standard, because now all of a sudden you've got the Chevy Volt coming along, you have other electric cars coming along. And so all of a sudden the complementary innovators are taking a look at this and going, wow, there's a market here. Let's do this. So yeah, that's kind of the innovation value chain. Where can you really, find value in this whole ecosystem? It reminds me, I had a friend of mine here in Dallas. He was Korean. I was making trips to the Asia all the time for my work, and I remember going to a Seoul, and I noted, and all of a sudden at the time, this is in the '80s, early '90s, and the population of Seoul, the middle class was really starting to emerge, and so as the middle class emerged, people were starting to buy their own automobiles for the first time. So automobile sales were really picking up, and Kia and other people were really starting to sell a lot of automobiles there. What I noticed that they didn't have was places where you could like get maintenance and change the oil. These quickie lube Jiffy Lube places that they have. So I made this offhanded comment to my friend, and he said, "Really?" And I go, "Yeah, there's just not many there." So sure enough, he goes to Seoul, talks to some of his relatives, gets some financing set up, and next thing I know, he's got a series of Jiffy Lube franchises all throughout Korea. I wish he'd at least bought me dinner after I, told him that, but that's the way life is sometimes. Strategic leadership. So here we're looking at exploring the role of top management and argue whether or not innovation is a function of the top management dominant logic. In other words, the people at the top, are they continually pushing for moving forward? Google, great example. Larry and Sergey, the story of Google is really interesting, in that Larry and Sergey were a couple of grad students at Stanford, and they they were working on their PhDs. Now, when you write a dissertation for your doctorate, one of the things that your dissertation committee is going to demand is that you cite all of the big players in your field. Who are the big players? People who publish a lot, people who are well known, people who are coming up with the new ideas. And so in the days when they were writing their dissertations, the only way to get that was through Alta Vista, but Alta Vista it just burped out all of the information. You type in, whatever your, innovation is your subject, and all these hundreds of articles would pop up, and you had to sort through and figure out which ones were good and which ones were bad. So how do you know who the most popular authors are? Well, those are the ones who are being referenced the most in other dissertations and in other books and on TV and everything else. Okay. So when you write a dissertation, when you work on your doctorate, you have to cite those people to show that you're on top of your game, that you really truly understand what you're writing about. And so what they did was they said, they took Alta Vista and they wrote a special algorithm to be able to, tell them, which people were most referenced. And they embedded that into the Stanford computers on top of some programs, and they started running it. Unfortunately, it got so popular because other people started to figure that out, that, hey, look at this great algorithm. It saves me a lot of time and effort scrolling through pages and pages of Alta Vista, sorts. So people, all of a sudden, people at Stanford started using it. And then finally Stanford said, guys, you're taking up way too much computer time here. You need to move it off or do something. So they moved it off. They formed Google. And do you know they tried to sell Google to Alta Vista, and Alta Vista turned them down. But one of the things that's interesting about Google, so they started out of a need. They identified a need. That was to be able to have some sort of way to sort and find the most popular reference material in a search, right? And then after that, but that's always been kind of ingrained in the DNA of Google. Like every Friday, they always have a get together with Google employees where everybody brings in their new ideas, and everybody's required to spend 20% of their time at Google coming up with new ideas. And so people come in to present all their new ideas. They reject a lot, but they do embrace some. Okay, Gmail and some of the other things that you've seen lately came out of these sessions. So the top management is actively participating in the innovation process. Okay. Microsoft, being driven, by the leaders at Microsoft. is they keep Bill Gates. Well, how did I forget his name? But Bill Gates is there and he's pushing Microsoft forward and he's driving it. And what's interesting is he started off with something called DOS, disk operating system, and that was going along fine. And then he tried to sell DOS to IBM, and IBM said, "No, how about if we pay you so much per usage in computers," which is the smartest thing that ever happened to him that he didn't intend. Because all of a sudden, as DOS started taking off, as the computer revolution started, all of a sudden he's getting, for every time somebody sold a computer, he got a royalty fee for using DOS. And then Apple came along and they created, of course, the user interface that was a lot, more flamboyant. And so all of a sudden he put a shell on top of DOS that made it look kind of like the Apple interface, and we called it Windows 3.1. And now every time an IBM sold or anybody sold, it became the what we call the dominant design. Anytime anybody bought a computer, Microsoft, Windows, DOS, it's all on there, and Microsoft gets paid something. Then he started linking other things into it. You got Microsoft Office, you got Microsoft Project, you have all these other things that he's kind of expanded in his brand into other areas. And so Microsoft, it was just Bill Gates always constantly looking for. Initially, he just lucked into it, but eventually he took advantage of his momentum and was able to start really dominating the PC industry. Apple, everybody kind of knows the story of Apple. Came up with the, Stephen Jobs, came up with the Lisa, then the Apple II, then eventually the Macintosh, which he designed. He started from scratch pretty much because he designed it. He didn't want to. Microsoft designed it for DOS, and then on top of that, Windows. Then on top, so they kind of built from the bottom up. The Macintosh team started from the user into the machine, and so they kind of did it backwards. And that's the difference in the Apple logic, which is why they're very different. But it was very user friendly. I know I'm an Apple user, and the reason for that is when I first started using computers extensively. This is back, 1984, 85. Microsoft didn't have the capability to do like charts and graphs and bubble charts and all those things. I was a strategy consultant. The strategy consultants like Apple did. They had CorelDRAW. They had other programs that you could get where you could do your charts or graphs. You can embed them right into a document. And so all the strategy firms, we all use Macintoshes. It's just kind of what we did. And so I've just been kind of a Mac user ever since, mostly because I don't want to pay all the money to transfer all the, buy all new software if I decide to get an IBM machine. So, because I think they both kind of do the same thing these days. But, although Apple they continue to be very innovative, especially in the whole Apple realm that they've kind of created. But it's that mentality at the top in Google and Microsoft and Apple and other companies, Tesla probably, where they're always looking for new and radical ways to create change and add value to the customer. This is a familiarity matrix, pretty simple concept, really. How close you are to an innovation determines a lot of times is success or failure. So we've got knowledge of the market here, we've got knowledge of technology here. If the people buying it are pretty familiar with both the technology and the market, sales are going to be pretty easy. Okay. If it's kind of new but still familiar, you can maybe extend your business into an adjacent area. But if everything's totally new and if all the technology is new and all the whole market that you're diving into is new, you're going to have to come up with a totally new business model here. So that's what this familiarity matrix tells you is, how willing are people to accept something. And so some people, it's like when a new version of Windows comes out, there's people who stand in line the night before to get the new version, right? There's some people who wait until maybe 1 million copies have been sold so that all the bugs are worked out. Then they'll think about buying the new Windows, upgrading to the new Windows. So it just depends. Utterback Abernathy. So now all of a sudden we're getting into, that's a static. Now we're starting, so here's static here, right? Now we're starting to get into dynamic models. And this is Utterback Abernathy. So he's saying that there's, excuse me. There's 3 phases in an innovation life cycle: fluid, transitional, and specific. So what are these things? Well, these are critical points in the life of an innovation. So here we're starting to look at, instead of taking a snapshot, we're starting to take a moving picture over time. So we're better able to understand exactly how our product is doing, okay? Utterback Abernathy also came up with dynamism. In other words, things change over time. The concept of a dominant design. Now, a dominant design is when a whole bunch of people start off in a new industry and they all start to build. At one point, everybody's going to agree that this is the best product. And unfortunately, at that point, all the other products kind of go away. In Utterback's book, he talks a lot about typewriters, how when the first typewriters came out, when the first ones came out, you couldn't actually see what you were typing. You typed, and then when you pulled the paper out, you'd see all the errors that you made, so you had to retype everything. Then eventually they changed it to where you could see what you were typing. Then eventually they made it to where you could have, certain companies, so where you could have capitals and small letters. Okay. And then, and it just kept, and then all of a sudden the QWERTY keyboard, the QWERTY keyboard is named because if you look in the upper left-hand side of your keyboard, it says QWERTY on the letters. All of a sudden that became a design. So all these new design changes came together, and eventually Underwood became the dominant design, and everybody else just kind of did not do so well. It either fell off or just adopted the dominant design, right? So that's what a dominant design is. We've seen it more recently with things like, a couple of years ago, we had this big, huge battle between HD discs and Blu-ray discs for your DVD player. Well, a lot of companies, a lot of money went into building HD discs, DVDs, and a lot of people went into making Blu-ray DVDs. Blu-ray won. All the people who poured a lot of money into HD, that money was just sunk. It was gone. So that's the power of a dominant design sometimes. So here's the fluid phase. So this is where you can be really innovative on the product side. So as long as you're in this fluid phase, the rate of major innovations, you can make all kinds of changes. Because so you think about, these are the designers and these are the people down on the manufacturing floor making things or prototyping them or whatever. In the fluid phase, you can make a lot of quick changes because the things aren't quite, the manufacturing, you've got higher skilled people in the manufacturing area who are, used to bringing these changes together. You haven't got a lot of product output going yet. And so you can make quick changes. But at some point, as you hit a later stage of the product life cycle, you're going to hit what they call the transitional phase. So right about here, excuse me, right about here, you're going to have to solidify the design, make no more changes. At this point is when the process innovators go in and they start to figure out ways to make the process to build your product more efficient. And so as the product innovators have to be less and less innovative at this point, they can't make as many changes. The process innovators are looking for how do you, get the cost out? How do you make the process more efficient and all those kinds of things? But so at the fluid phase, not a lot of major innovations in the process side. By the time we get to the transitional side, fewer and fewer innovations on the product innovation side, but more innovations on the process side. But by the time you get down to the specific side, this is where you're getting toward the end of the actual product, where it's starting to be, this is about the time something else is going to come along to replace it. So here's the dynamic Tushman-Rosenkopf, kind of similar to the Utterback Abernathy model. So, but we're looking at, he just calls it technical discontinuity, error, ferment, emergency of a dominant design, then error, incremental change. So, but basically his major point is the more complex innovation, the more the social political factors are going to evolve during the technology. In other words, social political factors are things like who's using it, how are they using it, is it easily adaptable, are the people that you've designed it for, are they actually purchasing it and using it? So there's a lot of the complexity. The more complex the technology, a lot of times, the more it's undermined by the factors for people to use it. If it's too complex, people probably won't use it. They'll just go, well, I don't understand it, and just set it aside or not buy it at all in the first place. So So that brings us to Foster's S-curve. And so this is where, the returns on the effort to put technology, fall off limits on the technology or approach. In other words, at some point, the technology can be limited by two things. One is just the physical limits. The technology can only take you so far. And then at some point, the physical limits, you have to come up with a change in the technology to go to the next level. We saw that with hard drives earlier, where, we went from, hard drives, we can make them, at first we can make them, so they had a little bit more capacity. Then we made them a little bit faster. Then eventually we had to change to optical technology to really truly take advantage of the hard drive. So the physical limits change. We see this a lot of times in semiconductor chips. They have this thing called Moore's Law, where every 18 months, the capacity of the computing power of a microprocessor doubles. Well, Moore's Law has continued to this day to be able to go, but at some point, we're probably going to hit the physical limits on the semiconductor side and the silicon side. But now we're looking at other material sciences to be able to figure out how we can do it and then they're also coming up with, quantum theories being able to tell us how to maybe even continue to keep Moore's Law going, by using quantum computing. So the original technology was there. It was doing great for a long time. Now we can perhaps go into quantum computing, and that's how we can continue to create really, really fast microprocessors, but we've hit the physical limits of the original design, right? So how do you predict the end of an existing technology and predict it? Well, here's what the product life cycle looks like. So you start off with a product and you have an introduction, and hopefully this is a successful one, by the way. Sometimes it just dies right away because no one wants it. But if it's a successful product, at some point it'll start to grow. But as it starts to grow, this is when everybody else starts to see it grow, and all of a sudden you're going to have competitors starting to sneak their way into the market and try and figure out what you did and duplicate it and perhaps even make it a little bit better. At one point, you've sold just about as many as you can because, the people who are going to buy it have bought it. You still have some people who are, kind of late bloomers who are going to continue to buy it. But at some point, you're going to hit a peak in the market, and then you're going to start to see a decline in sales over that product. And that could be because other people have snuck in or a variety of other reasons. Well, this is a key point that marketers and technologists always look for, because this is what I call jump the curve. In other words, here, you need to start introducing something that's going to go to the next level here. So here's the discontinuity. So here, this is just another way to look at it. There's limited competitive value here at some point. Okay, you kind of have to jump, to the next level to be able to, phase out the old technology, bring in something new. Here's a great example, the iPod. We started off with the iPod here. That was the first one that came out. And then eventually, you had the screen was a little bit better, a little more slick design. But the iPod initially, when it came out, was really interesting because there was nothing really new about it. When the iPod came out, did digital music exist? Well, yeah, of course, every high school kid who is, stealing music off of Napster could tell you that. Now, the trouble with Napster was it's peer-to-peer sharing. So sometimes you got a good copy. Most of the times you got a crummy copy because people taped it off the radio, or it was staticky, or just a poor, cut off halfway, whatever. Very few really clean copies out of Napster. You had to search for them. How could you get that digital music in a way that you could actually hear it play? Initially, a lot of people put it on their computers to hear it play on their computers. Eventually, people made, digital, music carriers so that you could walk around and you could actually listen to music. But they were kind of clunky looking, quite frankly. Rio was probably the most popular one. And it's kind of a blacky, clunky looking thing. And how could you get your music from the internet to your computer to this digital device? that you could digital music player. Well, you had to know how to do file transfer protocols to be able to do that. Stephen Jobs comes along and he says, I want to come up with something. I want to make a design that is, what he termed sexy, so that when you're walking around, you look cool. That's the initial design he came up with. And as you can tell, they continue to make better designs. He's working with a firm called IDEO at the time, who's an industrial designer. And then he said, I want to be able to get things easily from, the digital music onto the iPod. So he came up with something called iTunes. So even grandma, quite frankly, could get music from her, or digital music onto her iPod and walk around and look cool. And then at one point he'd made a deal with a lot of the music makers who saw all this digital music being stolen, quite frankly. And they said, we're going to get something out of it. So he said, okay, for every song that we sell through the iTunes store, you'll get, whatever, 29 cents, 49 cents, whatever the song sold for, you get a percentage of that. And so they thought that was a good deal. But the good news was you get a clean copy of the song each time. A lot of people are willing to pay for that. Instead of going and spending an hour trying to find a clean copy of whatever song you're looking for, spend 29 cents, spend 49 cents, boom, clean copy right away, high fidelity, the whole, stereo, the whole thing, and put it on your iPod and you're off and running. So it's working out pretty well for a while. Unfortunately, music theft still goes on. In fact, the only way that most of the people who make music these days can actually make a lot of money is by touring. They don't make a whole lot of money on sales. It's almost a marketing arm these days. But back to Steve Jobs. So he put this together, but all these things existed. Digital music existed, digital music players existed, ways to get it on your play, all existed. He just packaged it in a very seamless, easy to use, in his term, sexy way, right? And then he just kept improving it. So he's going along, and he had the menu driven thing. Then he had a little improved menu, and eventually he had color, and eventually he had but he kept improving it each time. Every time he started to hit this, every time he started to see sales drop a little bit, he came out with a new improved iPod and jumped the curve, right? So he would come out, better graphics, better keyboards. All of a sudden he added color, then he added video, then he kept improving it. Then he got one you can actually take to the gym or go jogging with, instead of having a big clunky iPod strapped to your back. So he just kept improving the design time after time after time. And then of course he launched off into all kinds of other things. Eventually he connected the iPod to a phone. Then from there he went to the an iPad, and then he has Apple Watches, and then he has TV, and it's all part of this ecosystem that Apple's been able to create, which is, by the way, why it's one of the most well-capitalized companies in the world, because he understood initially, and he ingrained that DNA into Apple, so much so that he was actually kicked out of Apple in the 80s and 90s. And I was a consultant back then. I wasn't there when he was there, but the people who came in to try and bring Apple around weren't doing a very good job. They eventually brought Stephen Jobs back in, and that's when he started coming up with all these new product innovations, brought in a whole new operating system, brought in all kinds of new ideas. Everybody at Apple has their Stephen Jobs story. So, but that's kind of the iPod, and that's how, once again, the important lesson here is every time he went to, the sales started to decline, he jumped to the next level, and he always stayed technologically and from a marketing standpoint one step ahead of all his competitors in this area. Some thoughts on implementing innovation. So we just talked about Stephen Jobs and other leaders, Elon Musk. You have two kinds of leaderships here. One is transactional leaders, the other is transformational leaders. Transactional leaders, these are really called managers these days, but their focus is on specific goals. They're working with people a lot more succinctly. They're using rewards and punishments to motivate people. Reactive, typically in nature. In other words, you go down, somebody goes down to them and says, I need this done this way. So that's the goal. And they react to that. And they're very focused on efficiency. You have transformational leaders who they're focused on the vision. They use charisma and enthusiasm for motivation. They're very proactive. So the question that usually comes up is, who's better for the organization? And the answer is, you need both. You can't, transformational leaders, their vision and they're trying to make people think they can do more than they could before and motivate people and very proactive, but they're not necessarily efficient. Transactional leaders don't have the big vision capabilities. It's just different kinds of people, but the industry, the company need both to be able to successfully perform. Too many transformational leaders, and all of a sudden you start arguing about vision. If everybody's a transactional leader, after a while, you're very, very efficient, like Ford Motor Company was before they realized what GM was doing, but they didn't have any transformational leaders who kept building a new vision and bringing them to the next level. So here's just some, this is an article that, Journal of Science and Research in 2015. Transactional leaders replace the wants of the leader for the wants of the follower. So what they're trying to do is just really look at what motivates people, develop, setting goals, directing them, striving to control outcomes. They can make important decisions. Transactional leaders, they're not just sitting around, waiting to be told to do something. They do have a lot of responsibility, and usually they have very strong personalities because they're out there, they're walking around, they're getting things done, they're talking to people, right? Characteristics of a transformational leader. This is Dr. Riggio. He said transformational leaders now idealized influence, hold and share common core values, and they constantly demonstrate those core values every time they do anything within their company. They're inspirational. They can convey a sense of confidence, a sense of purpose in people. They're concerned about people's feelings and needs, and they usually need first of all, they need a lot of intellectual stimulation because they're always looking for new ways to use technology, new ways to where the market's going, right? And but that they allow people to really learn and to grow and try new things. They really want people to continually develop within the company. So this is part of what we call the learning organization. Part of being a good innovator is, one, build on data. Don't build on rumors. Don't build on innuendo. Don't build on what Uncle Fred told you. Always go down and figure out what is the absolute truth. I've seen people build a house of cards, like this recent, cyber currency firm that just blew up because it was just, there was no truth there. It was just a guy running around doing a giant Ponzi scheme, right? Nobody really looked at the solid data, so what he had is a bunch of celebrities running around tooting his product. Great. That's how every Ponzi scheme starts out. So sit down and don't deal with rumors. And, I've been in more than one room in my lifetime and had one person in the room just go, well, it's my opinion that's this. Well, I'm throwing pure data up on the chart because I'm the strategy consultant, right? Well, it's my opinion that's this. And I go, well, the data contradicts you. Sorry, but the data is the data, Well, I don't believe it. Well, I'm sorry, but it is what it is. And so sometimes, if you're going to be in charge of your career, you can't deal with a lot of opinions. You have to deal with truth. And a lot of mistakes that people make is they go in and they have blinders on and they're only looking for data that suits their version of the truth. I see this happen all the time. So this is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories rather than theories to suit facts. So don't have blinders on. Go in, lay out what the facts are. This is especially true when you're doing case studies. Map out all the data that you have that you identify in the case study. Map it all out, or in your work, whatever. Map it all out, and then see where it takes you. See where the facts take you. Then, of course, when you have eliminated all of which is impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Sometimes the answer is not terribly obvious, but the facts, if you get them right and you use these frameworks that we've been talking about, hopefully you'll be on the right path. Okay. By the way, if you're wondering who these are from Sherlock Holmes stories. These are famous quotes from the world of Sherlock Holmes. So that's the end of this particular session. And I look forward to speaking with you in other sessions. Goodbye for now.